So I just finished the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles 2 days ago, and here are my quick thoughts regarding this game. This video will contain full-blown spoilers from both games as I recall each case and specific moments, so make sure you finish both games before watching this video. Alright, let's go. So while playing through the first case, one of the first notes that I wrote is that I love the setting. And honestly, this is a case where its main purpose, aside from being a tutorial case, it also has to set up the setting and events to follow. And I really respect that. The setting is established pretty well in this case. In a Meiji era of Japan, stuff like forensic science isn't really a thing yet, photographic prints are newly adopted practice, and women aren't allowed in the courtroom. So I really like how they set up all these small little details. I also love how they established Kazuma in this episode, clearly highlighting his traits and motivation, such as how he wanted to go to Britain very badly, which just makes the fate of him in episode 2 hurt a little bit more. Anyway, as far as this case is concerned, it is definitely not the best mystery to solve. It's a very pretty by the numbers case. I was pretty much bored by the proceedings. I think this case is kind of carried by the presentation, as this is the first impression I got while playing like a HD Ace Attorney game. I especially like the animations of Ryunosuke, his wide-eyed expression, him raising his hand nervously, and his weak table slam animations, which is a great contrast to Kazuma's loud and confident slam. Personally, I also had a good chuckle at the military weakness Iesa Nosa, especially during the first cross-examination where he's hiding Idol behind his back. You can distantly hear the baby noises, and then when you press him on it, it was a pretty funny interaction. I also of course love the animation of Idol pulling his moustache. For the main villain Jezu Brett, her characterization is also pretty well done overall, with her flaunting an air of superiority against the Japanese and their antique systems and whatnot. And the prosecutor's archy demeanor towards her, which really sets the tone for the rest of the game in my opinion. However, the case itself is pretty irritating. It feels very draggy. Usually the main problem with Ace Attorney trial section is when you as a player already know what's going to happen, but the game is still trying to catch up to you. Especially when the protagonist does the, oh no, he just broke my argument down kind of thing. And there's a lot of more cross-examination coming. The worst one in this case is definitely the plate switching shenanigans. It took way too long for the revelation that the plates were switched, when ultimately it's such a simple mystery. When the initial plate doesn't have bloodstain, Honsonaga can immediately just present the other plate. I do not know why we have to go through this. Oh my god, there's a coin under the stick routine, which completely destroyed the pacing in my opinion. But once again, I think this case, despite it being quite long for a traditional tutorial case, it does set up some interesting questions, especially pertaining to Kazuma's mission or Jezu Brett motives, which will only get its full payoff in the second game. For the second case, it's just kind of sad. It starts off with Kazuma dying on the ship. I really couldn't believe it. They literally just built him up in the first case just for him to die. My first initial reaction is that, damn, what a wasted potential. He's such a good character to die so early. It hurts really bad because he was a rather likable character with a great accompanying music team. Speaking of likable character with great accompanying team, in this case we get introduced to the one and only great detective Sherlock Holmes. So spoilers, he'll go on to be my favourite character in the entire game. It's in this case we also get to introduce to the dance of deduction mechanic, which proves to be absolutely fun. He's like the only bright part about this case in my opinion. His humorous behaviour always helps elevate the mood of the case. My favourite moment is when Susato just straight up debunks his deduction about the snake. Since the actual Unbreakable Speckle Band deduction is actually from the Sherlock Holmes novel, and seeing the characters in this case just bash it is so funny. That aside, this case is clearly the weakest case in the entire duology. As a purely investigation case with no trials, this case just isn't that good. It feels repetitive due to the limited areas you can investigate, and there's no stakes at all because there's no trials. And of course, the way it concluded, it just feels bad. A beloved character just died in the dumbest way possible. Just a bad case all in all. The third episode is probably one of the better cases in the first game. It's a complete contrast from case 2. This case is a purely courtroom case with no investigation sequences. The case starts with you meeting the Chief Justice Mil Strongheart, who assigns you a test trial in order to ascertain your ability as an attorney. I have noted here that I find it very suspicious that we describe this case as a simple and cannot lose case. The key that makes this case so good is entirely based on the lack of information we got, since we have to rush to the Bailey last minute to defend Magnus McGilded. So we have no idea at all, we are left completely in the dark about the prosecutor, the case itself, or the nature of the defendant. This case will also mark the first time you will see the jury system and the summation examination, which will go on to be a very fun mechanic in my opinion. I prefer these variants in the gameplay more than the Apollo's perceived mechanic or the mood matrix mechanic or the definition seance mechanic. Anyway, back to the trial, I like this case because once again, you go through a lot of emotions of like, I trust my client, I don't trust my client, I trust my client. Honestly, when I saw that the tools were missing at first, I didn't really care for it that much since Gina said she just moved it to one side, and the blood stain on the skylight was something I couldn't have checked before, so I wasn't that sure. But the blood on the floor was a major red flag. But I remember that time when examining the blood on the floor, the examine text was so blatant about it, so I was pretty sure that Magnus McGilded was in fact tampering with the evidence. Ultimately, when I first played through the game, I found that the not guilty verdict was clearly rushed. I don't know why the judge felt so compelled to deliver a verdict so fast, whereas in previous games in the series, the judge would be like, I expect both the prosecution and defense to go continue the investigation and then tomorrow we'll follow up the trial, right? But in this case, it just feels very rushed. So my theory was that the justice system is clearly rigged and the judge is potentially bribed by Magnus McGilded, since if you remember, Chief Justice did say we can't lose. My false theory aside, being an only courtroom case, I find that the case flows surprisingly well with many developments along the way. It did a lot of things in this one trial, like setting up stuff like the jury system, our introduction to Prosecutor Van Zix, and of course the events that would follow in the final case itself. It's definitely one of the better cases in this game. For case 4 is the standard filler case. We are first introduced to a new character in Gregson. My first impression is that I don't really like his theme song, so I didn't really care for his character. I'll say it does seem like a capable detective at first glance, whereas compared to other more eccentric detectives in the past. Anyway, it's also through him and Strongheart that we know a little bit more about the Reaper of the Bailey. For this investigation section, there's honestly nothing much to discuss. Nothing truly noteworthy happened, though I'll say the Sholmes deduction at the landlord's house is pretty funny. For the trial itself, I love the summation examination here, especially the construction worker and the hard-hearing green coat guy. You can criticize it for being cheap humor, but I really like how they handle it. I especially love the exchange about the birthday cake, where Ryunosuke says it's like a devil worship practice. Oh yeah, Susato was a badass in this case. Before this trial, I was kind of indifferent about her, as I think many of you will probably be also comparing her to other assistants in the past like Maya, Trucy, and Kei. Anyway, the two standout moments are when Susato speaks out about examining the fourth book, and the part when Prosecutor Van Zix makes fun of the defense theory, comparing it to a fantasy detective story, which may have struck a nerve with Susato, and I love it. And of course, it's these moments that makes her character important, especially since in the next episode she'll be leaving us very soon, so I have to applaud the writers for making her shine through in these scenes, making us care before she's gone. There's also another noteworthy moment that takes place shortly after this, which is during the cross-examination of Rolly and Patricia Beat. Wow, I got really emotional at this point, man, when Rolly confessed to tampering the crime scene and then seeing his crying animation. For a guy that had to work non-stop just for his one off day where he was supposed to spend time with his wife, just for it to get potentially ruined, I really didn't expect to get so emotional at that point, but yeah, that's one of the many reasons why I love this game. It humanizes each character whether they are doing bad stuff or not. At the same time, it does help give Prosecutor Van Zix that development as well, as right now the characterization for him is that he's just and a bit racist. And seeing Rolly being glad that he still has a job is always a good moment. If there's one thing I'll say though, the mystery in this case is very lame and very anticlimactic, which leads to the main complaint I have at this point in the game. So for first case, right, we do not know Jesus' Brad motives, and she's apparently not going to be trapped in Japan, which means there's an inkling that she's going to be scot-free, so it's kind of unsatisfactory. Then we got second case, which is primarily an accident, and your best friend died for the dumbest reason, kind of unsatisfactory again. Then you got third case, you got your client acquitted, but there's more that meets the eye with the tampered evidence. You never know the whole truth or the whole murder, leading to another case of unsatisfaction, and then now it's yet another case of accident, leading down to yet another unsatisfactory ending. Another point I think that is kind of noteworthy to mention is that this case features quite a lot of domestic violence and abuse. I mean, it's Ace Attorney, so they managed to pull it off quite lightheartedly, but I wonder what would have happened if the genders are swapped, especially when you hear the recount of juror number 5. Ultimately, I really believe that this case is mainly carried by the amazing writing and characterization with regards to the weaknesses like Rolly and Patricia, the jurors and the defendant. And it served its role as a normal filler case while introducing us to mainstay characters like Iris and Gregson, while also building up characters like Susato and Lord Van Zix. So even though I want to dismiss it as a bad case, the characterization and writing makes it a pretty good case all in all. For case 5, there's a lot to unpack here. I really like how the whole case starts out with a rather mundane slice of life situation with a depressed Herlock getting back his violin and a visit to the pawnbrokery, all leading up to the wholesome dinner scene with Gina coming over, which eventually leads to the murder case. This is also one of the most mysterious investigation sequences since no major crime has yet been committed. There's definitely some good moments here and there, like Susato hiding the telegram from us. One of the most funniest deduction by Herlock with the whole Egot Benedict digging with a broken shovel to steal the funds. And of course the moment when Susato reveals the unpublished manuscript title. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I feel like the investigation here can feel a little bit too draggy. I like the part, where we found out about Susato needing to leave, But one of the times I didn't really like was visiting Gina at first. The Gina's attitude of, just give up on me, I trust no one trusts me, don't represent me in court, that kind of attitude. Cause this it's kind of old and kind of annoying. This is one of those tropes in Ace Attorney that gets reused again and again. But of course this does build up to the moment of Susato confronting Gina in prison, so I guess it's kind of worth it, but yeah. The trial itself is also really well paced in my opinion, with many standout moments. The witnesses are very funny. Nash and Ringo testimony is hilarious. One can say that they are a little bit too cartoony and dumb, especially the parts where they just straight up betray Ashley on the stand on multiple occasions. Oh yeah, the stereoscopic section, I can't cross my eyes at all, so I wish I could have played this part on the 3DS. Another note I write here is that the jury coincidences. There's a lot of coincidences in the juries. I laughed super hard when I first saw the revolutionary guy on the from the newspaper in case 2. Then we also have Herlock's surgeon, which managed to help us solve the third bullet conundrum. And finally a juror that knows who is Egot Benedict. So it's crazy how many coincidences there are. I also like the peephole twist with the cat flap maker. It caught me completely by surprise. I never thought it's gonna play such a big role. And I find that the whole Gregson and Ashley negotiating at the witness stand to be one of the best plot points in the entire franchise. Which leads me to Ashley Graydon, the villain for this case. Of course, when we first saw him, it's very clear that he's gonna play a very big part and is probably the main culprit. But after knowing his motives and backstories, oh man, you can really sympathize with the man. I don't know how they managed to build his character up so fast in just one case, especially in just the trial sections. And seeing those flashbacks, you really feel bad for him, especially the ones with his dad. Which is kind of why I feel like this case feels lacking as a final case. There's no big triumphant moment at all, you just feel bad with a sympathetic villain, which is of course rather contradicting, right? Since in good writing you always want to have a bad guy with a good backstory, with good reasons on why they did what they did. But yeah. Anyway, that aside, I gotta say this trial is very well crafted from start to finish, especially with the parts where Ashley and Gregson were negotiating and him hiding this in the other witnesses. Like I said earlier, it's one of the best plot points in the entire franchise. The feeling of down emotion will carry on past the trial sections with the final farewell scene, sending Susato off. The whole mood here just feels rather bad. It feels like rather cliffhanging. And I can tell you right now, when I finished the Great Ace Attorney Adventures and was watching the credits, I felt kind of empty. There were just way too many unresolved plot points. It's the first time I ever felt this way. I mean, I even took the time to jot down some of the unanswered plot points here. So we have Susato's knowledge of Hounds of Bakersfield, Jesu's Brett motive of killing Dr. Wilson, and when will they tell Iris that her dad died? The mystery behind the Reaper the Bailey, how did the death occur? Lord Van Zig's incident with the Japanese guy teased after the trial in case 5. We got Susato's father's grave health condition. We got the Morse code with 4 names which included Kazuma Aoji. And what about Kazuma's mission at Great Britain? And why did he insist Ryunosuke to join him on this study trip? That's why when I was telling my friend that I finished the game, if I had to give a score to the first game, it would be in the low 7s. Alright, moving on to the second game, Resolve. I love the initial cutscene here. It is so well directed, seeing Susato at Kazuma's grave, seeing Jesu's bread mask, and then the reveal that she's dead. It really amps out a lot of anticipation. The first case once again will take place in Japan, with Susato disguising as a male student this time to help defend her best friend from the murder of Jesu Brett. It's very refreshing to see Susato in a courtroom. She's so cute in her disguise as Ryotaro Naruhodo. One thing I really like about this case is the prosecutor Ochi hair subplot continuing. I remember one of the earlier exchanges between Eugene and Ryotaro, where Eugene is kind of like, the stakes are very high for both the prosecutor and defense. That moment is so good. Anyway, I find that this case is really good, particularly because it gives us a different look into Susato, which happened to give us multiple savage lines and moments. So yeah, I find that it's pretty good and it doesn't drag on forever like in the first game. It also sets up Eugene Mikotoba as a major recurring character with many secrets, but also giving us a little glimpse into Judge Seshio Jikoku. For case 2 has a rather interesting premise. It's a recollection case. It was the secret case that is not to be revealed. So basically, Soseki Natsume was accused again right after the first trial from the first game. There was some lingering question from the first game that was never answered or implied simply as Soseki's imagination, stuff like the accursed flat, accursed spirit, and suffocation. One moment I really enjoyed is when William Shen's spear was revived from the table. When I first saw he was still alive, I was so excited. I was like, I would love to see his breakdown. This kind of flamboyant character usually has a very good breakdown. That's my initial thought process when I saw him. So yeah. I also like some of the mysteries solved in this trial, like such as using the fake ice coin, the poison in the gas pipe, or the cursed flat. I also really like the double attempted murder angle. It is so refreshing seeing it play out in the trial. I also like that the victim this time is actually the ultimate villain. It's a solid case all in all, even though it didn't necessarily meet my expectations coming from case 1. It's kind of deflating to see at the end that a bloody dog collar is the big bad secret that no one should know. I mean, it's still a great case all in all with many great mysteries and moments. For case 3, this is really the case that I'm going to be dissecting a little bit more. We finally get some answers explained while also giving us several more developments to the final act of this game. So this is the official first case after the events in the first game. As case 1 takes place in Japan, case 2 is a recollection case, so we finally get to see a lot of the development in characters, for example Gina and the Grove. She's now a detective apprentice under Gregson. I never saw that coming, so yeah. Speaking of which, Gregson will also be soon transferred to the police force in France and is taking Gina along to save her from the Reaper of the Bailey, which makes the demise of him in case 4 and 5 quite sad. The backdrop for this case is the Great Execution first teased in Adventures, where a murder took place at one of the science experiments demonstrating a teleporting machine. The defendant is a scientist named Albert Harebrain, the mastermind behind the contraction itself. Coincidentally, we also learned that Albert is also an old friend of Lord Van Zig's back in their university. Once again, another instance of building up Baroque's character for the finale, which brings me to the investigation scene in his office. When I first laid my eyes on the cloak mask figure acting as Van Zig's apprentice, I already know it was Kazuma. As unfortunately, I actually got spoiled by the comment section of a YouTube video where I searched up his team on YouTube. Anyways, in my notes here, I wrote that the Wax Museum part of the first investigation was an absolute delight. Herlock Sholm was such a goofball throughout the entire investigation. The first trial section is also really exciting as well. I like the witnesses' interaction, especially the young bohemian prince. I also like the dynamic of Lord Van Zig's siding with Albert that his invention was a success while being the prosecutor, whereas we as the defense is trying to tear down the defendant's creation. That's also around the time where we get another great Susato moment. So Susato is finally reunited with us again, which is always great. Bring us useful information from Japan, like the fact that Jazzlebread's real name is actually Asashin, the other name in the Morse code we heard near the end of the last game. We also finally get the revelation behind how Susato know the title Hound of the Baker's Veil, which is obviously a clue as to the role Eugene Mikotoba will play in the future. The second day investigation is also quite eventful, with more exposition at the Wax Museum, Susato yelling Kazuma-sama, confirming the suspicion we have about the cloak mask figure. We got Gina and Toby the police dog, and finally the Drebber lab section, which is also very well done, with the highlight being the anti-gravity deduction segment. I think this is one of the best investigation sections in the entire duology in my opinion. Speaking of Drebber, when I first saw him, his particular animations were very eccentric, especially the one where he does the shrugs. It's so creepy. His entire demeanor is just very creepy. I was very sure he was the culprit. So the second trial definitely caught me by surprise. I didn't really foresee Dr. Courtney being involved. I remember it goes to a point where you have to name someone that is Drebber's accomplice, and I didn't really know who to pinpoint. Subsequently, the trial will focus a lot more on the professor case. Side note, I really love the animations of Esmeralda. For example, the Shash animation and the one where she's carving up a Herlock Sholmes model. Eventually we get to uncover Drabble's tragic backstory. His entire bright future, is just gone just because of that one article. Once again, just another sympathetic villain. I was taken aback by how much the Professor case is going to come into play. I was honestly expecting only a few teasers here and there. After all, this is only the 3rd episode. At that point, I didn't know that the episode 4 and 5 is essentially one major case altogether, so I thought episode 3 wouldn't be the one case to really clue in on the finale. It really goes to show that they were trying to reimagine the format and structure and order of Ace Attorney games, and I think they did a great job subverting players' expectation in 2 games when it comes down to the structure of an Ace Attorney game. Anyways, with the conclusion of the trial, we got one of the most well-earned cutscenes in the entire history of the franchise. It just has an epic feel even from the first few seconds, with the opening shot, the empty gallery, the wax figure in the middle. But I have to say, the voice acting does take me out of moments at times though. I get that they're trying to go for the Japanese people speaking English accent, but it feels weird. The "was Japanese" part is kind of cringy, not gonna lie.
Was Japanese?
Wait a minute.
But I have to say that the music that plays here with the "His Glorious Return" just hits you with the feels, man.
My best friend, Kazuma Asogi. After a whole year, finally his memories returned.
One of the best moments in the duology. I remember getting to this cutscene around 3 AM, so this was it. This was the moment I'm going to sleep afterwards. So while I was lying down and trying to sleep, a few theories started to spring up my mind about Kazuma coming to Britain. It must have something to do with his dad and proving him innocent. So which leads to me thinking of some of the people who betrayed him. And the one I kept thinking of was actually Eugene Mikotoba. After all, he's keeping a lot of secrets from us, and Lord Renzik clearly remembers him. So he's just a very fishy character all in all. Anyway, it's clear that from this point onwards, we are finally going to get to unravel some of the major plot points. So the case opens up at the Waterloo Hotel lobby against the backdrop of the Forensic Symposium, which has just been teased just one episode ago. It feels like things are finally coming together. Looking back, it feels a little bit heavy-handed with the amount of information we got in the lobby. By the time, I just thought it was normal banter. Stuff about Jigoku breaking the witness stand, stuff about him not needing to be checked. At that point, I never even imagined that Jigoku is too involved in the case. So later on, we found out that Gregson died. Once again, I didn't really care for him that much. Since like I said earlier, I didn't really like his team. Well, I guess in some situations he was pretty helpful, and his interactions with Iris and Gina are always quite endearing. But yeah, I feel like his character wasn't really built up that much. So I didn't get the same feeling as I felt when Kazuma died in case 2 of game 1. Anyways, I just want to add something here. Even though I didn't really like Gregson as a character, I gotta say this scene was written really well. The scene starts off like a normal, goofy, comedic scene with the obnoxious hair color on Herlock, and us returning back to report our investigation findings. So as players, we are already expecting some funny interactions and whatnot. But with the news of Detective Gregson dying, you can really tell that the whole comedic energy is just gone, and you can really see Herlock just being upset with himself. A really good character moment for Herlock, especially when you realize what he knows later on in case 5. So eventually we get to know that Gregson was behind the Reaper organization and Asashin was actually an assassin. The first trial was honestly not that meaningful in my opinion. The big gimmick here is that it's a closed trial and Kazuma is actually the prosecutor. And I didn't really find anything too interesting here to mention. The 2 con artists definitely reminds me of Ringo and Nash in how cartoony stupid they are. Anyways, the second investigation, the big reveal, is situated at the end where we found out about Herlock Sholmes' partner. First thing first, this dance of deduction is absolutely splendid. The best part is when Susato joined in. The second best part is when Herlock became unconscious as well. When the reveal came that Eugene Mikotoba is actually Sholmes' partner, my jaws were on the floor. I was beating myself up for not seeing it earlier. His entire Britain outfit just looks like the depiction of Dr. Watson. This is probably the best twist in the entire game, a perfect cliffhanging end to the episode. Which leads us to the final episode, and Male Strawheart is the judge. Okay, I'll say that it's actually surprisingly quite fair during the first trial, such as letting Renzik stand in the witness stand alongside Gina. Maybe this is done to disarm players a little, letting players think Strongheart is impartial. Anyway, that aside, this trial was pretty insane. There's just so many surprises thrown left and right, such as Kazuma being an assassin alongside Gregson. And of course, the other big surprising moment is when Gina said the Mark's name. Then of course we get a scene at the ship with Herlock and Eugene. Wow, I just love this sequence so much. It just feels right, man. Sherlock and Watson as partners solving the crime. You know, throughout the entire game, I was hoping for one deduction scene when Herlock solves everything on the first try, and this is it. You know, there's the theory that Herlock is, purposely acting aloof most of the time, and he's just trolling Ryunosuke and everyone for fun with his previous deduction. And you know what? That's a pretty interesting theory, because he's gonna be stealing the entire show in the later part as well. After this segment, the court is adjourned. We finally get most of the truth out of Herlock, such as the assassin exchange plan with Asashi and Kazuma. We also find out why Sholmes lied to us about Kazuma's death, which at the point I had an aha moment. When I finally knew why in case 2 of game 1, Sholmes wanted to sweep the incident under the rug and just call it an accident. It finally all makes sense, why he said stuff like he never took into account that Ryunosuke are friends of the victim. You can really see the forward planning that is present in the games. The first part of the final trial is pretty good, though a bit predictable in certain places. There really wasn't any sweat in proving the crime that Jikoku killed Gregson. After his confession, the trial definitely has a feel of a final case, with multiple witnesses from the professor case lending their testimony. It feels like one big retrial, which is always kind of cool. It's like a staple of Ace Attorney at this point, with stuff like DL6 incident, the SL9 incident, and the Dual Destinies final case. Though I would say the mystery behind it is quite obvious. For example, after I heard that the 4 previous victims of the professor died from a dog, whereas the last victim died from stabbing, it's quite easy to deduce that the last victim was the professor. The will of Clint Van Zyx being kept in the sword was also quite obvious, especially after the prison governor said the personal effects Genshin was allowed to carry in his possession while in prison. Nevertheless, the whole ordeal orchestrated by Herlock Sholmes and Eugene during the last trial was very grand. It's just immensely satisfying a cornering male strongheart, as he has zero chance to call for a brief recess or a premature enjoyment. Which actually brings me to the main man himself, Male Strongheart. Low-key, I was hoping there would be a twist somewhere where he wouldn't be the main villain, maybe a phantom or something. But alas, we got the most obvious answer. It really begs the question though, why did he make Kazuma the prosecutor? It literally made no sense in my opinion. He should have known his resolve from the start in proving his father's innocent. For that matter, he's supposed to be like the big bad master manipulator, blackmailing and forcing people to do his beating. He could have easily just put 2 puppet lawyers on the opposing bench and just call it a day, and carry on with the forensic symposium. The fact that he has so much power and was still overthrown by Ryunosuke, Kazuma and Sholmes is kind of pathetic, not gonna lie. Anyway, rant aside, the trial itself is great. I especially love how Sholmes was 2 steps ahead of everyone, including Ryunosuke and Kazuma. And of course, the final sequences of Holmes and Iris are absolutely absurd, with the Great Pursuit music playing in the background, Sholmes dancing around, and it totally fits the tone of a final case in Ace Attorney. Like I said, the big triumphant moment. The whole spectacle is just so over the top, culminating in an absolute top tier breakdown. With the trial ending, the last remaining plot points are also resolved, like the truth of Iris' death. What follows the trial afterwards is quite a lengthy ending. Gina was given the Gregson clock, for example, continuing his legacy of eating fish and chips. The ending in Sholmes' place is also very heartwarming, seeing Iris say he has the best daddy in the world, referring to Herlock. Seeing Herlock react so emotionally makes me emotional as well. It makes me wonder whether we will ever get a moment like that with Phoenix and Trucy. Shortly afterwards, we also get Ryunosuke's decision to return to his homeland to pursue being a defense attorney in Japan, which leads to the final farewell scene, which can feel a little bit drawn out but still well deserved at the same time, since we finally get the best friend scene with Kazuma, which was lacking ever since the second case of game 1. We also get a slight romance angle with Susato-san at the end, which is quite cute, with you by my side.
With you by my side, no trial would seem too daunting. So if you're willing, I'd be honored if you'd come with me. Together we can take on the world.
And that was that wholesome and satisfying ending to the duology. As a complete story, I gotta say it's pretty dang good. For this quick rundown of my thoughts, I didn't even get the chance to talk about Sherlock Holmes references or the fact that this is a period piece with so many details about the Britain and Japanese history. I think the best part about the story in my opinion are the characters. While granted Shu Takumi was given 2 full games to complete the development and arc of each character, this is probably the best characterization in the entire franchise. Like I mentioned, even the villains and side characters are all written really well. And I'm so beyond grateful that these 2 games are localized. I know there's the Scarlet Study fans translation, but seeing how Capcom implemented different quirks like dialects, the franchise trademark use of puns, and other intricacy is just great. Anyways, after playing these two games, I finally understand why fans want an Ace Attorney reboot, and I'm looking forward to seeing new spin-offs in the future. It's been so long since I last played something new related to Ace Attorney, and I gotta say I'm very satisfied with the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Lastly, I really hope this compilation sells well enough that Capcom can justify localizing Ace Attorney Investigation 2. It's literally the only game left for me to play. Anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts about the games in the comment section below. I'll respond to everyone here. So thanks for watching guys, so long guys, so long.